Hi, everyone. My name is Jake Khym from Life Restoration Ministries. Today, I sit down with a good friend of mine, Jason Jensen, and we have a discussion about men's groups, what makes them work, the best ways to have the men thrive, some of the places that we can go in discussion. Jason has one of the best men's groups that I've ever seen, one of the most long-standing and committed groups. So I'm excited to share this with you, and I hope that it helps you consider some ideas about what your men's group could become, and maybe even it inspires you to get into a men's group or start one yourselves. I hope this blesses you. So here we go.
So we are here to talk about men's groups. So I love the thought of discussing it with you because you've done men's group longer than I have and more committed than I have. You probably have one of the most committed long-term men's group I even know about. And the way that I think a men's group is good. Well, do you want to start with what your men's group is like, or do you want to start with why you even do men's group?
I'll start with a story, how it actually happened.
Yeah.
I was out of university, but when I was in university, I was a student leader, and my boss, his name was Glenn. And I watched him go through his wife dying of cancer, and she struggled with cancer and then went into remission and then got cancer, and she ended up, it was about a year, on that second time. And this is a man who's like part of my mosaic of fatherhood. Like, he has represented God to me as what a good dad looks like. He's kind and all that kind of stuff. And he said to me one time when I went to visit him, when I was out of university and coming back, he said, "Man, I don't know where I would be without Bob, because sometimes at 2 a.m. in the morning, I just have so much anxiety about my wife's going to die." And I didn't have a category. I didn't have a category for that kind of male relationship. And I was like, I don't know if I can do life without that. I was like, that's the missing piece. And literally I was at Trinity Western University having this meeting, and I drove on my drive home. I phoned two guys and I said, "This just happened." And I said, "This is what I want, because I don't have this. And do you want to be in a men's group with me? And if you do, it's once a week for the rest of your life." I literally said that to them. And
you're obviously already friends with them.
Yeah, friends. But at this point, like, the relationship's we haven't shared deepest, darkest secrets or accountability or anything along those lines. It's, you're a man I think I could do life with. This is the mechanism. You're in or you're out. And and they both said yes. And that's how it started.
Can we take me back to what it's like to, I can put myself or maybe 100 other men in that scenario, and they hear the story of Glenn and Bob and they go, "Man, that's great. Good for them." And they just go about their life. You were in a space to where that moved you. What's going on before that to where you feel the need to act? There had to have been other dynamics, or how did you see it?
Imagine young man out of university, you've got an education, or like you're entering the workforce, education or not, like you're trying to develop a sense of like, how am I a man in the world? Like, I didn't have any of this language, but sort of the Becoming a King, Morgan Snyder, men's retreat stuff that we've done has given me language post this. But the feeling is, I don't know how to navigate life as a man, having to, for the first time, contribute to society. Everything else is like education up to that point to some degree, right? And the responsibility of being the men of society is not on you. So am I worth it? Are questions that you have, like, do I have what it takes? All of those things are things that rattle in our hearts, and feeling to some degree, I don't know who to talk to about these things. Like, we can approach mentors. That seems like a established way of relating for men with other men. Like, I can go ask people who are at a stage ahead of me, but there's no peer-to-peer modeling in that. And you're like, I just need a buddy, and I, for whatever reason, I had a real sense that things like your wife dying of cancer is a part of how the world is today. I wasn't naive to, it's not a question of if I suffer, it's when. And am I going to be ready for that? And do I have the right mechanisms in place in order to do life, and like, I don't know, maybe I was listening to like, I think it's like, is it Brian Tracy or like, who's one of these speakers or whatever. And it said, find a doctor, find, like an accountant, people that you can grow with that know your life for like decades or whatever.
Right.
And maybe, I can't really, this is a long time ago. This is like almost 20 years ago. That's how, and I was like, oh, I don't have friends who want to go really deep. And for me too, I just don't want to live life shallow. Like I won't live it shallow. I've just made that commitment. I can't talk about, the weather or sports as the only part of a relationship. And I do want to play and be able to, you and I have gone and watched a basketball game together and just have fun. And, I went snowboarding with a friend, just to, but if that's the only thing, I just can't do it.
Yeah.
I actually have to go deep first and then play, which is maybe I got some work to do there, but.
I love the point of, I didn't know how to be the man I wanted to be. You're entering into a new stage or phase of life and you're saying, they have something that I don't have and I'm going to need it. And I need to establish and build this foundation or structure sooner rather than later, because the struggle, it's coming. And that to me is a brilliant foundation for the need for men's group. Because if you don't have that worldview, then you believe, I don't need it. I can do it on my own. But you had enough maturity to be able to see and look past the immediate moment to go, I will not be who I'm made to be alone. And so I'm going to start establishing things now.
Yeah. And the other part is I just think there was grace there to see it. I don't think I fully appreciated the moves I took, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But I did feel the world is going to crush me. I'd rather have some other guys be crushed with me.
Totally.
than do it alone.
Right.
I've just never wanted to do life alone. I think that's the other part of it.
Which is, I think it speaks to a lot of the success that you've experienced as a man, and take that professionally, personally. You've done a lot of great things as a man. And I imagine you would link a lot of that to some of these key decisions that you've made. And I know you've suffered, and I know you've weathered some serious storms in life. Again, personally, professionally, etc. Can you imagine doing the past 20 years without a men's group? And if so, what comes to your mind?
There have been parts of my story in the last 20 years where I've withheld from the men's group, and it's shame avoidance. So,
Sure.
I'll tell you a story. I feel much better about talking about it now than I did back then, but I remember first business out of university. So I'm in this business. When I start the men's group, it's like going, okay, 2008 hits, maybe it's 3 years into the men's group or whatever. And, lose a lot of money quickly and just think, I'm going to just ride this out. And long story short, end up having to declare bankruptcy because we didn't pay taxes. That was one of the, just orphan, all of it, no advice, not seeking anything.
Right.
And that loneliness was just crazy. I remember going to the bankruptcy trustee's office, and it was on the 3rd floor. And the only way to get there was an elevator at the front of the building or stairs. And it went past all the other businesses that were on the 2nd floor and the 1st floor. And I had another friend who was a lawyer on the 2nd floor. And I remember pressing the button going, please, Jesus, don't let this open on the 2nd floor and see and have my friend be
Oh, wow.
there, because the only thing on the third floor was the bankruptcy trustee.
Oh, man.
And I remember like that was some of the loneliest feelings of just being totally alone. So even within that, like there's things that I've learned over the course of time.
Right.
The men's group wasn't perfect
Sure.
right out of the bat. It actually took something to do that, which is why you really have to understand what you want from it. So I could see some things early on, but I didn't really have the maturity to be vulnerable and to do those kinds of things. And I got to go to Jordan Peterson recently. You know,
Yeah.
I actually went with Heather because Jake was sick, and Heather was like, "Hey, would you like to go?" And I was like, "Yes, I'd like to go." Yeah. So that was great. And one of the things that really stood out to me was he talked about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and he said they decide at some point in the narrative we're gonna go find the Holy Grail. And Jordan Peterson, one way to think of what the Holy Grail is it's the cup that had Christ's blood in it, or maybe caught the from the cross, caught his blood in the water and whatever. But another way to think about it is just the most precious thing we can find, right? So the most precious thing that we can go after. And so the Holy Grail is lost, and all the knights decide we're going to go and find it. And how they decide to go search for it is they say every knight at the Round Table, enter the forest at the place that you perceive to be the darkest spot. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think, so we go find the thing that is the most precious to us by going through the darkest place. And if I think of like, why am I in the men's group? It's because when I'm in that darkest place, searching for the things that are the most precious to us, I don't want to be alone. I want other people to say, you've got a blind spot here, and the dragon or whatever's waiting in the forest for you is going to get you. You know, like have your wits about you. And just, I know for myself, I have a high degree of self-awareness, but I still can't see everything about myself that other people who I let in can see with me. And the real treasures in life are when we enter the arena, or when we go after the Holy Grail, or when we go after these things. And we have to do it with other people, or it's very scary, very dangerous. You can die in the arena. And so, yeah, that's the kind of like being able to find language for that has been super helpful. But that's why I want to be in a men's group, is because I want the best things in life.
That's so good. Did the other men have the same passion and interest when it started?
There was definitely a leading that I was doing in that and saying, look, this is what I want. But not 100%. You know, if there were other things like, hey, yeah, we should learn how to pray, or we should do a book study, or there's some collective sense of like, yes, getting together as men is good. You know, like I think that's baked into the culture of Catholicism or even Christianity at large.
Yeah.
But I don't think the clarity of like all of that was there from day one, but it's for sure there now. And if we could shortcut that process, which I'm hoping this podcast allows guys to do, that would be really great.
So let's go there. You're already talking about, I think you've done an amazing job of setting up the need. And I think there's a crossroads right there. Does the man who's sitting wherever he is listening to this realize his own need, the same need you realized? Does he believe that he can do it on his own? How's that been going? Is he willing to be honest? I don't know the model of a man who's a thriving disciple of Jesus, who's also Rambo and who does everything alone, who's the Lone Ranger. It doesn't work. I don't think that exists. This, I'll do it all on my own, self-made man. I think that's contrary to discipleship and contrary to being in relationship with Jesus. So there's a crossroads right here you've set up.
Yeah.
And if a man sees the value, then maybe we can help men advance along the path of 20 years that you've done it for, to be able to, you've probably learned some things along the way.
Yeah.
Which is an essential sign of maturity. So let's talk about what you've learned along the way that maybe the listeners could go, oh, that's huge. Okay, I don't have to learn that, make that same mistake.
One of the things before we get into like the mechanics of the men's group, because the mechanics are actually quite simple.
Okay.
But the principles that fuel the mechanics are a little bit more complicated. So one of the things is to be 90% known is not to be known. So if you're wanting to come up and say, look, I'll share like the 90%, it's just not what you're supposed to be. And here's how, and we can dive into the psychology of this, but look at the whole social media problem. Why is it causing as much anxiety as it is? It's because I present my very best self with a doctored image and whatever it is, all the highlights of my life, and people are like, yeah, you are awesome. But if I saw the real you, 100% of you, would somebody still say you're awesome? And because we don't know that somebody would say you're awesome and affirm who you are, warts and all, we go, I'm not convinced I'm actually loved. And I feel like there's a way, a spouse can know you, but the way a man can know you and affirm as another man, say, I see that, I see your weakness, and I still love you. I see your wounding. I even see your sin. That is the love that a men's group actually translates directly from Jesus for you. So let me unpack that a little bit. Jesus saw 100% of you while you were still a sinner. He came and he loved you because you were worth it. So if we want to kind of have this posturing culture of like, look, I'll put 90% out there, and if they affirm that, okay, I've avoided, but it's actually putting the last 10% out there, and then somebody's still saying, I love you and I see your weakness. It's beautiful. And part of this is understanding that we actually love when others are vulnerable with us. It grows relationship in depth so quickly because in some sense it's weakness. Vulnerability is like admitting our weakness to the other. And my kids, I love that my 4-year-old, can't fully clothe herself by herself and, or tie her shoelaces or whatever it is. That doesn't make me go, maybe at times, but I love that she needs me, and I think God loves that we need him. And when we are honest about saying, can you help me? That vulnerability is the actual thing God loves in us, is when we share our weaknesses. I think that on a different level, not maybe a father-son or father-child relationship, but that translates brother to brother or man to man in that sense, is when I say, hey, here's a last 10% thing in a men's group, they can go, oh, I can hold that. Thank you for sharing. I struggle too. Whatever that might be, I see how difficult that is for you. I see that you feel like you don't have enough right now. You're a good man. Being 100% known means you experience being loved more.
Yes.
So
there's a lot to what you're saying. And I think maybe we'll put that on the whiteboard per se to get to how do you do that well? Because that requires, there's an art form to handling a guy's last 10%. And if you do it wrong, it can blow it up.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that in a second. It seems like there's other things though. It seems like there's more maybe principles.
Yeah. I feel like we've touched on the one where I don't think you can understand yourself except through the light of the other.
Yes. Like blind spots. You can't see everything. You need other people to see you.
for sure blind spots. And I think we kind of talked about like, there's spots I can't see. Within that too is that whole, I can't remember if it's C.S. Lewis or G.K. Chesterton, when one of the friends died and he said, I don't get to experience my other friend because the one who passed away can't summon that part of the man out anymore. I can't summon that part out. And so only God can summon the whole of the person out. But in our relationships in general, there are parts that I have the capacity to summon out in you that maybe Brett as your friend can't.
Yes.
And there's parts Brett can that I can't.
Yes.
And when Brett summons that out in you, I get to see a part of you that I don't get to see if it's just you and I. And so that's why it's the collective is so powerful in bringing more of God out of you. So there's a particular genius that is Jake and Jason and, Brett's not here, but Brett and every man, like we are a brilliant idea in the mind of God, each and every one of us. I love seeing somebody else bring that out in my men's groups. There's a part of Pierre that can bring something out in his brother Robbie that I get to experience of Robbie in my men's group that is only there because Pierre's there, right? And that doesn't mean like, let's just make it massive and whatever. But when there's enough. There's a critical
mass of guys to bring.
And then I get to see, oh, I saw that part of you. And that becomes more of an interpretive lens for me to be able to be in relationship with him.
Yes. So the principle I'm hearing you say is it's in relationship that we find ourselves, as well as where we become fully ourselves in a men's group's an ideal environment for that.
Yeah.
Are there more?
Yeah, I feel like the exclusivity is maybe another.
In a good way or a bad way?
In a good way.
Okay.
So we had a men's group and we were like, once it kind of got chugging along, it's like, this is so good. We should grow this thing.
Yeah. And bigger, better.
The bigger, the better. Yeah. Right. And then you get 10 guys coming and then you get 15 guys coming and just no one gets known anymore. Right. So, and at that point we're like, okay, shut this whole thing down. And then we went back to the core and went, okay. So
you actually did that. You actually grew it and it got bigger.
Yeah.
And then,
we were at like 15 guys and It was like, oh, it
was too many.
This sucks is really what happened. It was way too many. Not everyone gets a turn every week. The guy with the biggest issue like dominates the room or goes every week or whatever. Right, it's just, if you want to have a 15-person men's group, or let's say you want to have 12 apostles, you have to spend every day with them. Like that's maybe the model. It's like the more people you have, the more time you have to spend together.
Makes sense.
In order for every one of those people to be known.
Huh. So what is is that mechanics? What's the critical number you found, or do we hold that off?
I mean, we can go into that now because it's related, but I would say no more than 5. I feel like, and 5 you can get through maybe 4 or 5 of them in 3 hours, which sounds insane. Like, what do you mean 3 hours? Okay, well, we're sharing. So
we might, just to give context, my men's group has 4.
Yeah.
And we meet weekly for an hour and a half, and all 4 never usually go.
Yeah.
But it's what we can commit to weekly. And it's always 1, maybe 2, rarely 3 all have an opportunity. We just met today and primarily 2 guys got substance out of it, but we're very sensitive to that and we'll try to emphasize the next 2 the next time, and life happens. But I really hear your point. Time, the amount of time every week is a big deal.
Yeah. Let's jump into mechanics. I don't have any other principles that are jumping straight
I think
out.
One that you live by, and I think it's worthwhile to say, is this concept of speak the unspoken. Can you break that down and what that looks like in a men's group? What is that? And I'm assuming you do it all the time.
It's helpful to say what speak the unspoken is not.
Okay.
It is not permission to be an a-hole, and speak the unspoken it's about saying, hey, there's this thing, maybe the last 10%, or I see something in you that's a blind spot, or I see something in you that is not the real you. You're living some sort of false identity.
So it doesn't always have to be negative. I'm hearing you say it could be you're diminishing yourself.
Yeah.
Or you're sinning and you're not being honest about it, or the elephant's in the room and nobody's talking about it.
Or I don't hear your heart in your what you're sharing with me is just a repeat of what happened to you. It's actually not what your heart dynamic, like,
That's
which
good.
we can kind of go into to that part, but speak the unspoken is saying the truth in love, right? And in order to do that, you need enough relational equity, which comes with some sense of a commitment. So our men's group has this promise of like, hey, you're every week for the rest of your life, unless God kind of calls you somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So at one point, Robbie moved to Calgary for school, and we're like, hey, that's great. Once you leave, it's not because of the exclusive nature. It's not necessarily like we'll have to discern if you move back, if you can rejoin the men's group. Like that's how serious it was.
Wow.
And he did come back and he did rejoin.
You didn't meet with him on Zoom or whatever.
I mean, this is like,
there's probably reasons for that.
well, it's like 2013 or whatever when he left. So it's like Zoom wasn't really a thing. And like,
I get you. It would have been phone. And
the rest of us were in person. So having somebody like, I still phoned him every week, so I still stayed in personal relationship. He wasn't dead to me because he left.
Yeah.
We still spoke often.
Okay.
At least we'd speak for an hour every week, at least.
Wow.
I'd drive him on the way to and from work or whatever.
Okay. That makes sense. I feel like I speak the unspoken. That's a good, and I know it's a principle you live by, and it's one that I've adopted the language. I think it's basically being honest.
Yeah.
In love.
And it's a mutual permission to say, look, do we all give each other permission to speak the unspoken? Like that's the fullness of it.
Yeah. And not permission to be a jerk, not permission. And maybe we'll go now to more of the mechanics, because that kind of principle in the wrong hands can be dangerous.
Yeah.
And it can blow a men's group up.
Yeah.
In a negative way.
Yeah.
So let's talk mechanics. Some of them that you've already listed, you say weekly for 3 hours.
Yeah. And the way our men's group, we don't commit to 3 hours.
Okay.
We say Wednesday nights, it's the day we've been meeting for forever. And it's meet at whoever's house after the kids are in bed. So we get together at around 7:30 or 8.
And your kids are all roughly the similar ages?
Yeah, but at one point we had a conversation saying, hey guys, if our kids kind of keep going to bed later and later, we're going to start meeting at 9. That doesn't make any sense. We're all exhausted or whatever. But so we've all had a conversation with our wives that have said, hey, on Wednesdays, we would like to be able to leave the house somewhere between 7 and 7:30 at the latest.
Yes.
And barring unforeseen circumstances or crisis, like that's the week. We don't have to, it's not a conversation every week. We've had the upfront conversation with our wives. We've had the upfront conversation as a group.
Yes.
So the expectation is set.
Got it.
And I think a lot of what makes it work is just setting expectations up front, even knowing whose house you're going to go to or where you're going to meet, that it's not like a decision. You got to just eliminate as many of those things and decisions ahead of time, or the devil will start tearing it apart.
Yes.
Right. And if you got to arrange schedules and like, we'll figure out.
That's so true.
And this is why once a month also doesn't really work. It's like, well, when? And if you're not in the rhythm of it, it can fall apart like so many things.
Yes.
Outside of just it's not enough time to spend together.
There's a scheduling dynamic, but a heart dynamic too.
Yeah.
In once a month.
Yeah.
You said something earlier and the word came out of my mind. You were saying, I want to be attentive to the guy's heart.
Yeah.
What does that mean? And how does a guy do that?
Let me go to some ways to get there and understand how to do that.
Okay.
And then we can back into like the heart.
Okay.
So if you're starting a men's group, you should very early on in the men's group go through a life story process of it. Just everyone in the men's group sharing the life story.
So break that down a bit more.
So, and then some of this is like me, we did that, but the way you shared with me is really helpful. So 0 to 5 years, what was your life like? Good, bad, like tell us, where were you born? Like what do you remember of those early childhood years? 6 to 10, 11 to 15, 16 to 20, like just break your life down into those chunks and tell us a little bit of a sequential, like who you are and where you come from, like that's like one level, but then what are big things that impact you? And there's work to be doing for me to tell my story. I have to go and sit with it and go, oh, like, 0 to 5, I was in one part of South Africa and then I moved from there to another one. Oh, that transition was pretty good. Like, like
yes.
I can actually have self-knowledge through the process, and I prepare that. It's like, Jake, you're telling your story next week.
Got it.
And so you prepare your story and you come and share that.
Got it.
The power of that is, man, I understand so much more about who you are, knowing what your story is.
So that's something that's happening earlier on, because you're trying to get a sense of who the man is, to where when he's dealing with something in the current, you can go, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
He does the same thing and he's been doing it for his whole life. And I saw it here and here and here and here and here.
Yeah.
Let's go there. What's this about?
Yeah. Hey, it seems you're operating under this kind of set of events that you've made agreements with.
Right.
And it feels like that. Are you sure it's not that? Because oftentimes guys will come and they'll say, here's a scenario I have. I need you guys to
help me talk
figure
through
me
it.
out.
I'm in a fight with my wife or whatever.
Yeah, sure. And it's like, which part of you is presenting the details? Right?
I know exactly
you laugh because you know
mean.
what you mean. And it's like, and I think it's about guys having enough details that they know which version of you is operating, because it's really hard sometimes to know which version of me is operating.
Who's the real guy? Yeah.
And I'll give you a story. I've asked permission for Robbie to share the story, but this is the power of that kind of thing. Robbie's a physiotherapist, and he's just got, this personal mission to evangelize the body by, like to have somebody feel really loved by caring, honoring, understanding that their body is a profit to them and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's very good.
And so he's going into getting a tiny biopsy in his stomach, like he's having reflux issues, and they're like, okay, well, let's do some tests. And he sees that there's an option to actually stay awake during the process or get knocked out.
Okay.
And he's saying, oh, I think I'm going to stay awake, and I really want to be present to myself and all that kind of stuff. And I say, this is while we're at a urinal next to each other, just for context of how we're having this conversation. It's super weird, but whatever. And I say, Robbie, I think you just need to get knocked out, because the part of you that's operating is the one that just wants to stay in control. For me to be able to understand that with his whole like physio mentality, and understand that it's the young control part of him at play, requires a deep understanding of the man.
Yeah.
Right. And so that happens when you understand the whole context of the decision.
Wow.
And that's the power of having like somebody tells their story up front, because then you can start going, oh, this is kind of how you tick and how you're wired. And some of that's really good.
Yeah. So you're in some ways laying out an initial structure, which is expectations. Are we all in?
Yeah.
This isn't for the faint of heart. And I'm with you. There are other ways to do men's groups. And I think this genre is the way real life comes from. There's other models and guys can go other ways, but that's not what you and I do. So this initial, here's who I am, see me. And I'm really hearing go the whole 100% there. Yeah. Get into the nooks and crannies, into the dark areas of your story, because the premise is that I love you no matter what. Yeah. And love doesn't mean, oh, everything's fine. It means I won't abandon you when it gets hard. And I want you to thrive. And at times that's admonishment, and at times that's blessing. At times that's encouragement. At times it's exhortation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Empathy.
Yeah.
All that stuff.
All that.
Yeah.
So then all the guys have shared their story, and I can see that'd be that would be a really impactful experience. And one idea that comes to my mind is, if you haven't ever done it before as a men's group, go away for a weekend.
Yeah.
And do that over the course of the context of the weekend.
Yeah.
And my men's group did that, and boy, was that
powerful.
It's launched us way ahead.
Yeah.
So, but what?
And we didn't do that up front, by the way. Like,
okay.
We only did that after several years, and you can just instantly, the depth just goes way lower.
Yes.
To be able to understand, and like, oh, I was bullied as a kid here, and I was like, whoa, that makes, my goodness,
no wonder,
that's where this other thing that I've been noticing is coming from. And
but what is the generic structure? And we've talked about this before, because I know you don't go, hey, let's go read Father Robert Spitzer's latest book and let's break that down. You don't go an intellectual route.
Yeah.
And that might be hard for guys. So break that down. Why?
So the structure that we use weekly is highs and lows.
Okay.
And we actually have the fun game that gives our men's group personality. We do like this game called Wang Ho, where we do random selection, where you pick a number between 1 and 5, you total all the numbers between 1 and 5 up, and then you just count. You go like, so say it's like, I throw 5, you throw 4, you throw 3, and somebody else throws 4. The person with the highest, who picks the highest number, goes first, and then you start with that person. You go 1, 2, 3, and whoever it lands on, it's their turn.
Okay. Cool. Okay.
And the funny aside is, the guys, Stefan, who's like a programmer, developer, and engineering mind, he noticed that I threw a 5 and a 1 often as my randomization. And so he developed an algorithm and shared with the rest of the group, saying, hey guys, I figured out, because my name's the lowest in the alphabet, it's a tiebreaker if I have a 5 and somebody else has a 5. And they figured out that when we all start with 5 guys and with 4 guys, there was a way that, depending on where they sat relative to where I'm sitting, what number to throw in order to force me to go first. And so if I randomly threw another number, they had a 5-person version and a 4-person version of the algorithm. And for over a year, they made me go first or second. Yeah.
Did you eventually figure it out?
They eventually said, okay, guys, are you ready to be honest? Anyway, so that's just a,
that's fun.
I share that because it's a fun story about like,
it's playful,
and I didn't clue into it or whatever.
And a guy's personality coming out in a really fun way.
And them trying to, my personality's in that too, where they're like, there's a playful ganging up against me that kind of happened in that they knew that they just couldn't wait for the day where they told me that they got me.
Yeah. That's fun.
And the beautiful part is, like, the season where I had to go first for a long time was one where I really needed to go first.
Wow.
You know, so
the Lord was in the algorithm.
It was so good. I laughed so hard.
Yeah.
So then it's highs and lows.
Okay.
And
what does that mean, and what do you do?
Yeah. So this is why weekly matters, is a lot of life happens in a week. And it's that stuff where real man discipleship works. It's like, oh man, I was so triggered by this, or the low part. And it's like, this situation is like really stressful for me. I feel anxious about this. And then the high part is, man, this went really great. Or that thing I told you about last week resolved in this way, you know, and in that, as somebody is sharing, it's, where's the Father in that? You know, what is the Father saying? And there's a way that we're like trying to interpret that person's life, because God is authoring, you know, we co-author our lives with God as the author, right? And we're trying to figure out, like, what is the Father up to in your life?
Wow.
That's the highs and lows real secret sauce, is when you're able to go, not, hey, you're not meeting a standard.
Yes.
You know, like, that's not what highs and lows is about. Even though that might be true, the point is, like, we're all not meeting the standard, you know, because none of us is Jesus. But what is God doing in my life? What is he, what's the season for me, you know, and highs and lows is the mechanism that kind of gets the data points of interpretation out to the group in order for them to say, oh, that's so good.
I'm hearing you lay out a format by which a brotherhood helps each man see the Father's place in his life so he can continue to grow in sonship. And I don't know if you get more core and basic. Like if you're trying to boil it down to what's most important, that's sure it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of genius in what you're just describing there. There's a playful way to get it started. The format's the same every time, but the content isn't the same every time. If a guy starts repeating the same content every time, a principle pops up of hey, I'm noticing that you always share the same stuff. Like, is there not more going on? Help me understand, But
or if somebody just is like, this, I did this on Saturday. What was my weekend? Blah, blah, blah.
It's shallow.
Where's your heart? Like, I'm not hearing your heart. I'm just hearing the details of your life. I'm not hearing how your heart went through the week.
And so you're prioritizing that the heart is central and what matters, and the relationship with the Father is what matters. And instead of going, oh, that's your story. Okay, nice. Next, you're going to come around the man as a community and say, we want to help you see what God is up to. There's a basic principle that you're illustrating, which is if I see the purpose, if I see the why, I can almost endure any what.
Yeah.
And so we all are enduring positive or enduring the negative and relishing the positive. But if I can't see the positive, you're going to help me see it. If I can't see the negative and I'm avoiding it, you're going to help me. Like, but where is God in it all? Instead of just, I think men's groups can have this tone of, it's an opportunity to just kind of like, this holiness, I think for a lot of men is being hard on each other. And I'm not hearing you say that that's the tone at all. That's coming beside the man, with the man, to help him see the Father, instead of saying, suck it up and go deal with.
Yeah. If your men's group is not filled with kindness, you're doing it wrong. Like, if you're like, oh, I don't want to go to men's group because like I'm going to get
They're just going to beat me up. Yeah.
Wow. Then you're doing it's wrong, right? And like,
that's good.
Either tell the others that it's wrong or quit. Like that's not a men's group that I think every man needs a men's group, but that's not it.
You can get a personal trainer elsewhere.
Yeah, sure.
That's not the spot.
Exactly.
Right.
The kindness part is just, and it's like kindness and curiosity, right? We need this for ourselves, but we also need this with other people.
That's good.
And so
is that the mentality that you have and the expectation is the other men have? Let's say I'm going and I'm sharing my high lows. What everybody else is doing is I'm going to love him well and kindness, but I'm also going to be curious about what the Father's up to and helping him interpret. And I'm looking at it through several lenses.
Yeah.
Who's the Father? My brother's story, all these things. And I'm trying to, what do I see as all those things go on top of each other?
Yeah. And just a note on kindness. Kindness is not necessarily niceness, right? Like kindness is actually sometimes, hey, I think you're the one in your situation that's the issue, and I love you, and let me tell you where I think that's coming from,
right?
And I love you, and you know what I mean. Like it's just that's really, really kind, because if you don't say that, he just continues banging his head against the wall.
Yes,
and that situation either gets worse or he just checks out.
You're doing something there that I think subtle, but needs to be labeled. You have, as vulnerability increases, the tentative discussion, that the presentation of my interpretation for your life is more tentative. I think that I wonder if is a tentative instead of, well, you know what the issue is. As vulnerability increases, kindness has to follow.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll offend. And then when offense keeps happening, you won't go. Relationship and trust don't get built.
And permission to continue exploring is also a thing. Like we don't submit ourselves to total vulnerability and on command, right? Like, so it's
good.
Hey, Jake, are you open to the interpretation that I think is going on in your life? Should be another phrase that's there, right? Like, hey, can I, in other words, do I have permission to kind of share what I think I see?
Wow.
And like, does that resonate? And then it's
great questions.
there's oftentimes when we're right in the sweet spot, a men's group, a guy's kind of going like, he's like this, he's open, he's kind of looking down. He's in the sacred space in his heart.
Yep.
I'm kind of describing this real time. And we are blessing him with the feedback.
Yes.
Right? But he's there with Jesus, and we're the voice, we're voices that are guiding and trying to, again, share what we see the Father doing in the man.
Yes. If you can get there, your men's group has huge potential, and it's not that hard to get there based on the principles you've laid out. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. How do you know though, when the sponge is saturated, when he's had enough for this week? Because I imagine at times you have to be careful that you don't keep offering and he's just getting flooded at that. Like, how do you discern and intuit that the guy's in a vulnerable spot? We're trying to love him, bless him. When do you go, okay, I think that's enough. Let's give him some space to breathe. Maybe it's time for the next guy to go. Or,
oh man, there's so much nuance in relationship and all that kind of stuff in that.
Maybe the point we should say, it can get too much.
Yeah, it can get too much. Most of the time, well, I'll give you an example where it gets like this. There's an art to it, right? So it's art. So I'm trying to describe art, which is,
that's awesome.
It's challenging, but there's sometimes where you say, "Oh, I'm good. I'm done. I've shared my highs and lows. My turn is finished." Right? Not I'm done. I'm out. But my turn is finished. And in that, it's not uncommon in a men's group to go, "Hang on, you said something there that like, I want to dig a little deeper in that. Like
I want to explore that with you.
It's super rare with us at this point in our men's group that we flood somebody and they just check out, but that happened early on.
You guys, I know the four of you have a pretty high EQ and we can't presume that that's the case for everybody.
The principles is like, I can be done when I'm done,
you get to say when enough's enough.
Yeah. And I get to say, I don't want to process more now. I'll come back to this.
That's awesome.
It's always.
That's awesome.
But sometimes people go, "Oh, I'm done." And you go, "I don't think you are done."
Something feels avoidant about that.
Yeah. In fact, just this last men's group, Robbie kind of shared his week, and I phoned him on the way home and goes, "Hey, I couldn't place it in the moment, but there's parts where I wasn't hearing your heart. Can we talk about that?" And so we spent another 40 minutes on the drive home, talking about his heart.
Wow.
So it's less about the rules and more about who goes, do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I'm trying to help translate it for a guy who doesn't know what you mean. But you're saying another point there, and I think it's worth labeling and highlighting. I'm hearing you continue to use the word, "How's your heart? How's your heart?" You have this focus, not data, not necessarily content, the matters of the heart. And so what are those matters? Relationships are matters of the heart. Emotions are matters of the heart. Beliefs, in particular, lies or very negative beliefs. I'm such an ass. I'm such an idiot. I never get it right. That we're dealing in the matters of the heart there. And so it's not just, I had a really bad week. My boss came down on me really hard because I screwed up something, but I'm fine now. My turn's over. If I don't know how to look for the heart, I go, I don't know what to do now.
Okay. Oh, it sounded like he was vulnerable, like, "Well, thank you for sharing,
Right.
Versus, "Hey, your boss came down for you super hard. Like, how do you feel going to work tomorrow?" Can we unpack emotions and beliefs just for a second?
Let's do it.
I feel like emotions are one of the most brilliant mechanisms God has given us, right? And we need to trust emotions, but understand what they're communicating. Because emotions, our body is so brilliant in going, "I feel this." And the feeling is actually it's interwoven in my belief system.
Yeah.
And so the feeling will tell me is a very accurate measure of the belief system I have.
Yes.
And so if the belief system is faulty, you can have a faulty emotion. And this is where we get in the church like, oh, emotions can't be trusted.
Yes.
But it's actually that belief systems are wired incorrectly, or we believe falsehoods about the world that aren't true as the gospel lays them out.
Yes.
Our worldview is faulty, but our emotions are always honest and prophetic for how we see the world.
Yes.
And so if you understand that going into a men's group, the emotion will tell you what the belief is.
Yep.
And then we can talk about the belief and then say, what is the Father trying to address in that belief by sending that event in your life? Because he's providential. Nothing happens without his permission, so that you can go through that event and we can interpret that event together to correct the belief system, because that's the thing that actually changes your life and helps you grow in holiness and peace and all that kind of stuff.
That's awesome, Jason. I think it's language that is sometimes less intuitive for men, but there's no mechanism of man that means he can't get that. There's all kinds of stupid stereotypes that, say, oh, men don't do that. That's just not true. You could argue that men have a much greater depth of emotion than women, as potentially not a greater breadth of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And so emotion and thoughts, I'm hearing you say, are some really good dynamics. As a man in my men's group, I'm listening for beliefs and I'm listening for emotions. And I might just simply query those as the guy is sharing his story, because the hunch is that's going to probably draw me deeper into where the Father might be active, or where the man might be shutting down, or have a habitual dynamic going on, etc.
Mm-hmm.
There's no coincidence or like, oh, that's just random. I randomly have a sex addiction. No, that's not possible.
Yeah.
It isn't random. Or I randomly am always coming down on my kids. That doesn't work. There's heart dynamics that a loving group can help support and hopefully help you grow.
Yeah. The other thing is like a checkpoint to see if somebody's heart's in the conversation is if they're talking about other people, which is not in a gossipy way,
right?
But, oh, this person is going through this in my life. And it's so subtle because, oh, my wife's going through this, this thing when she's really wrestling with it. And it's like, it's great. I actually enjoy hearing, about other people in your life because they're in my community too.
Yeah.
But I want to hear what's going on in your heart, not in their heart.
Right.
Right. And so that one's super subtle.
So if the dynamic's going on with their spouse, the simple question could be, how is that impacting you?
Yeah.
Again, I'm hearing you listen and converse with, you are the center of attention right now.
Yeah.
On purpose for your good, so as to hear what's going on in your heart and to hear what the Father's up to, so that you can grow in sonship and we grow in community. To change the topic a little bit, we could talk about that for a long time, but why, I think it connects to the point that we just made. Why not do book studies?
Let me give you a nuanced answer. I don't need a group of people to read a book. I read books by myself all the time. So what's the point of us getting together to read a book? Like, we're not a bunch of idiots who need accountability on reading things that are worthwhile to ingest. So I'm always reading books, and I'm always bringing the value of what I'm reading back to my men's group. But if we need a book to hold us accountable on the subject matter that everyone is consuming in the week, that's just a bad idea. That's school. That's homework, right? However, there's some brilliant books that help me access my heart in the subject matter because they're taking me through a curriculum. I think Becoming a King is one of those books.
Agreed.
Right? But if we're getting together and go, hey, did you read the chapter? You've missed the point. My heart is the point. Your heart is the point. Becoming a King helps me access my heart. So I should say, I read chapter 5 of Becoming a King. This is what it brought up, this is what it awoken in me. Let me share that. But it's not if I read chapter 5 and if we're all on chapter 5 or whatever, that doesn't help. The other thing about a book is that it quickly goes to hiding intellectually. right?
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you the insight I got from chapter 5 of becoming, like that's not what I'm after, and that's not what any one of us are after.
And I'm hearing you nuance something that's really important. You're not saying that can't happen in other contexts.
Yeah.
If you want to go to school and go to a group of men that get together to go to school together, have at her.
Yeah, I want smart people in my men's group.
Right. However, it's different. School and men's group aren't the same thing, but they can be confused.
Yeah. So why not center your men's group around a book? I just don't think it's very easy that mechanism loses hearts. And at the end of the day, like, you're going to do a book study and maybe you'll do 2. And guys are pretty, like, they endure a lot of things. I think that's part of masculinity, a lot of suffering. At the end of the day, you just go, okay, like, something else is more important to me, playing soccer or whatever, because my heart comes alive, so I actually think the thing that keeps a men's group together is that your heart stays alive. So now we're competing against things like a book study versus playing soccer or going snowboarding. Like, those other things get my heart alive. So I should choose those,
You're mentioning something that I know you guys have worked out and you do a good job of, which is play.
Mm.
Is it always highs and lows, or do you periodically go, we just need to go have fun, or how's all that work?
Yeah. We go play outside of men's group.
Okay.
So we basically stick to highs and lows.
Okay.
But
to supplement
a strange thing happens when you are close to somebody. You kind of want to hang out with them more.
Imagine that.
And so, yeah, I just went snowboarding with Pierre on Tuesday. We booked the day off and we went with my oldest daughter. And just because there's so much depth in relationship there,
wow,
we went there, and I play soccer with Robbie. We go on walks. We have lunch together. We work in the same town. Like, play can get you into your heart too.
Yeah.
But oftentimes, if you're not intentional, especially as a man, about getting into your heart, the play becomes very shallow, or it doesn't actually aid the heart, right? So it's not necessarily a linear thing. I think it's a circular thing.
Yes.
Which one is requires more intentionality to get into heart is the men's group side of it.
Yeah.
Like the meeting, the hanging out.
Yeah.
And then the play can actually strengthen the bond. But I think that's the order that it works best in. But yeah, we love to play together. I don't want to prescribe that men's groups can't play. Maybe that's a way for them to enter into their hearts. But then it's hey, watch out.
Agreed.
For losing your heart in that.
Or watch out for letting play be the thing that connects to your heart, and then you avoid depth.
That's right.
Then you're just you're a boys club.
Yeah.
Who goes and drinks beers and throws darts.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think that's interesting when we look at your men's group and my men's group is that my men's group always meets over Zoom.
Mm.
We're all over the country. I'll share a little bit about that and just you can comment on what comes up. So our format is we always have high-low in our back pocket, and we've totally blatantly stole that from you guys. And other than that, I would say that in this type of setting, group dynamics, I have a lot more experience than the rest of guys because of my professional training and whatnot. So I've assumed, and the guys are very good about checking in to make sure it's not a burden, I'll facilitate the group, meaning I'll kickstart us. And so the group comes and I start the opening prayer. Everybody else, we all pray. And we're pretty intuitive with the Spirit, where if it feels like we should maybe linger here, one guy will say, I think we should pray a bit more. Awesome. We're all docile to that guy's discernment. And then sometimes I'll randomly come with completely random questions or exercises or things I've read, or I remember doing this in grad school or whatever. And I'm like, let's do this because it's a mechanism to access the heart.
Yeah.
Now there's other dynamics that can arise in that, which is you start to realize themes in a particular man where he always responds this way. And I think that's when the group matures and you start addressing that with Speak the Unspoken. We just had probably our first time, and I totally used your phrase of the last 10%. One of the men in the group said, I I want to have Lent be really, really fruitful. And he asked a question, which was great. It doesn't have to be me. And he said, what's holding us back from having this be the best Lent that it could possibly be? And it was an awesome question because we all are used to the heart level and we all plunged in and all shared. And it became an experience of the last 10% came out for every guy, which
Beautiful.
was so powerful.
Yeah.
We have to manage the Zoom dynamic. And so we commit every year to spending 3 to 4 days together in person in the summer. I loved what you said about prepping the family. So we already have it booked in June this year. It's usually July. And our wives and spouses knew about it 4 or 5 months ago. And so there's a lot of prep and planning to respect the home. But Zoom isn't ideal, but I just want to let people know that it's very doable. And the reason that I think it works is because we're a good fit. We're similar thoughts and minds, but different enough. And we have the capacity to do that. So what are some of the pros and cons you could see by having it be Zoom or not Zoom? And how do you manage that? And how do you know the right guys to pick and all that kind of stuff?
I'll just respond to I'm also the guy in our group that often is the instigator of things. And we do things like one time somebody will have a question. And usually it's one where the data points are really limited. You know, like I'll share the question, but I won't share the answers.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, how often do you guys make love to your wife a month? Right? And I share that in like kind of a vulnerable thing.
That's a really vulnerable question to guys who can't handle it.
Yeah. And I mean, this is within decades, but that ended up, the whole conversation was about this dynamic in our marriages, right? Like, and it's also worth telling like a point of like, my wife and I have a really clear understanding of what I can share at men's group and what really I can't, right? Really like, good. And I think that's different for every couple. And there's also a dynamic of what we share back to our spouses about things like that. Like a guy might share a dynamic that he faces. You might anonymize that back in the feedback, right? Like,
there's confidentiality in the men's group.
There's confidentiality, but sometimes what somebody shares blesses the other, and there's art here, right? There's art and there's depth, and it doesn't mean a free for all, you know, that your men's group is actually your men's and women's group. And, you know, it's like, that's not what it is, but there's also things that just deeply bless by being said, this couple has this kind of insight into that question.
Right. And let me give an example in case people wouldn't know how to anonymize that. Like it could be like, hey, honey, how was men's group? One of the guys shared about how he and his wife communicate, and it really blessed me. The spouse, my wife, doesn't know which guy it was, and there's enough guys in the group, and I withheld enough of the details to anonymize it, so she doesn't know, but she still gets to hear how that thing blessed me.
This idea came up from one of the guys, and it just resonated with me.
Right.
You know, do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's like, you can say that, well, I also know these guys so well that I have a really good sense of what they're okay sharing and what they're not.
Well, that's history.
And that's history. And that's, I would say, if the rule of thumb would play on the safe side.
Absolutely.
Right? Like as a principle, is like, don't wander beyond what you're sure of. It would be a really good one. Like both bringing into the men's group and taking out.
Jason, that's huge, because a men's group can start to dwindle or be affected because the man's not connecting with his primary vocation to make sure that the men's group blesses his primary vocation. There's a lot of men out there who have marriages that struggle. And I think as a footnote to this primary, secondary vocation, if you're in a men's group and all the members of the men's group do is bash your spouse, you do not have a healthy men's group.
Yeah.
You don't need bandwagon people. You need empathetic people and people who can see your heart and see what the Father's up to. That to me, like, I loved how you said that's the secret sauce. It's absolutely the secret sauce. If it's just tried to make a guy feel better, send him to a crappy therapist and they'll do that. And it'll be totally hollow and meaningless, but that's what they'll do.
Yeah.
It's not going to bring about change in substance for them. So there's some really valuable points that you're highlighting there. Do you have any concern about, which is, I'm interested to hear, I imagine you don't, but I don't know, about Zoom?
No, not at all. I mean, at the beginning of the pandemic, we did Zoom for like 2 years.
Okay.
Right? And we yearned to be in person. I think just like we all yearned to be in person, you know, I think it is like better, and I would fight for that if I could. But I think in your case, like considering your calling and me knowing like some of the other guys in your men's group, they sort of have a shared experience that you might not be able to get locally in your case.
Yes.
So Zoom or not getting that, it's a no-brainer, right?
Good.
So, and again, you got to check your heart. You know, like in this case, that's the only option. For some guys, they go, oh, okay, well, let's meet once a week on Zoom as opposed to like driving out and seeing each other in person.
Yes.
It's like, well, maybe you're making an excuse, but you kind of got to know your heart, right? Like,
that's good.
And I'm not going to prescribe Zoom versus in person.
Agreed.
Know your heart, right?
So
like
good.
that's how you make the decision.
Yeah. Am I avoiding or not?
Yeah.
Yeah. The conversation's going awesome. Is there any kind of final thoughts that you might have?
One other thing that can shortcut depth in your thing and help you hear the voice of God. So I think it's worth sharing.
Yeah.
About once a year, we'll do a series of what we call hot seat. And we go through all 5 of us, but you know, one guy a week. And what we'll do is we'll say, hey, where are you at in kind of a broader season? And they'll give us a little bit of detail, and they say, okay, all of us are going to just stop and pray for that particular guy who's on the hot seat. And we're just going to try and hear what the Father has for them, you know, like, and let our spiritual gifts kind of come out into
Really
that.
Wow.
And so we'll pray until everyone kind of feels like they got something, you know, whether it be a picture or a word or a verse or, you know, a sense or an analogy or whatever. And then we'll say, hey, here's what we got. The beautiful thing that happens is like the Spirit shows up and things have happened that there is no way we could have understood that thing, right? Like, and for confidentiality, I can't give examples, but the other thing is what I hear that might be random and like, oh, that doesn't really fit. How does this, oh, that can't be God, that's me or whatever. You still write it down. And when everyone shares, you see how each of these pieces kind of fit and you go, oh, that was me hearing from God. So if you want to help your men's group start hearing the voice of God, it's a beautiful way to go to start gaining confidence that that thing I heard was the voice of the Father.
Wow. Because you wouldn't have known it otherwise or whatever.
Well, it's just a beautiful, safe environment to practice that.
You say it tentatively. You don't go, God just told me to tell you. Like
that's right.
You're still doing, and if it doesn't resonate, he's not mad.
Yeah.
If the guy in the hot seat is like, okay, doesn't totally resonate.
That one, like, I can't place that one or whatever.
Okay. How often do you do hot seat? Once a year?
Once a year.
Is it like 5 times in a row?
Yeah, 5 times. It'll be a season of hot seat where we'll do it. And it's not strictly once a year, but around every year, 18 months we go, hey, we should do hot seat again. And it's just a way where sometimes men's group does get stale or that can happen too. And hot seat is just like like your life story. It's just a way just to breathe new life in. And sometimes it's not just a way to do that. It actually brings a totally different part of like God's interpretation of your life that's more broad than the data points that are from the week. I think that's the normative and this is the extraordinary, right?
Yeah.
And this is where like identity questions of who does God see you as, like the man, not the season.
Yes.
Who does God see you as, not what is he doing in your life, kind of can be answered in that.
That's very good.
So sometimes guys, it might take 2 weeks because you have a hot seat and you're like, whoa, guys, that stirred a lot up. And so that's 2 weeks. So it ends up being 10
longer,
weeks or whatever.
You got time. Who cares?
You're not in a rush because you're meeting every week, remember?
Right. Jason, there's so much that you said that's so good. What I'm going to land on, I'll let you have the final word, is it makes so much sense to me why on the men's retreats, we give preference to men's groups. Because if we can facilitate a weekend and 5 guys come and I know that they're going to go off and meet weekly, I want that group of men to get on this event because the fruit, they're taking care of a lot of the follow-up, and the effort and blood, sweat, and tears going into the men's retreat is going to probably I've got good soil I'm working with, or potentially a better quality soil. And that's no slight against the guy who doesn't have a men's group, but there's a difference. And that's the whole point that we're laying out. So I really want to encourage men to get a men's group going. And similar to you and to me, it started with a really good friendship with Brett. And then we both went, these other two guys would be awesome. And then we asked. So there was a similar step of faith, but final words.
Guys often understand the language of investment, and investing this time, it's a lot. It's not just a 1% of my income in an RRSP kind of, it is a significant portion. It is the kind of investment that is high risk because you're putting so much in it. But I've never seen it not pay dividends of 1,000-fold. Like, I would say even my relationship with you, we can have a deeper relationship because of the work that's been happening in my men's group. And I bring myself all these other places as a better man because of that investment that has been made in each other. So if you're thinking of a justification for it, it is the best return that you could ever have outside of investing in your relationship with God, in like prayer and like with your spouse, if you're married, or your primary vocation. This is like the next thing. It makes you a better disciple with God, and a husband and a father and all these other things. It just makes you better everywhere.
It's so good. Thanks for sharing.
You're welcome.